By now, you've learned what the file input control is and how to upload files to the server using it. You've learned about the FileReader class that lets you read files on the client side. But there's a problem with the FileReader as it is in its current design and structure. In this video, I will highlight that problem. To highlight the problem, I will take a file reader that allows a user to upload multiple files, and to keep it simple, we'll let him upload multiple text files, and I will want to display the contents of all those text files in a text area, one after the other. For this, I will take an input control of type file and a text area. I'll add some CSS so it doesn't look completely horrendous like it is now. In order to add functionality, I'll add jQuery and a custom script. All I want to do in this is when the files are selected in the file control, in the change event of the file control, I want to read each file one by one and concatenate its contents one after the other and display the concatenated contents in the text area. Just to separate the contents of each file visually, I will add 2 new lines in between the contents of each file. Here is where I want to read each file. And before I call the read as text, I want to set up the onload handler, which gets called when the file read is completed successfully. Since the result property of the file reader contains the file contents that have been read, I will assign that to a variable named file contents. I want to display this in the text box in the text area, but I want to concatenate each file's contents first and at the end display them in the text area. So it is only natural that I write code like this. I take a variable called content of all files. In fact, I'll have to take it outside the for loop. As each file is read, I will add the file contents to each file, and then I will also add 2 new line characters after each file. In fact, let me also display the file name before the file contents. The file name can be gotten by this variable file .name, and let me add a new line and some kind of a marker in between the file name and the file contents. I and you are both mindful of the fact that this piece of code can be written in a better way without having to concatenate this every time. We can use an interpolated string or a templated string. But since that's not my concern in this video, I want to focus all my mental energies on the main point, which is to highlight the deficiencies of the current structure of the FileReader class. All these files will keep getting concatenated to this variable, and at the end, when they've all been read, over here after this read as text call, I will, to the text area with the ID preview, I will set its text property to the variable content of all files. This looks like it should work, except that it won't. Let's see what's wrong with this. I'll select all of these files, and we don't see anything in the text area. Let's look at the console in the developer tools to see if there's any error. There is no error. This is strange, isn't it? What's going on? Let's debug the code. I'll put a breakpoint here as I start to read each file. One over here and one over here. And I will select these files again and click open. We see that the files collection or files list has 3 files, and the file we are currently reading is the first one. As I step through the code, I attach an onload event handler. I pass the literature.txt file to the read as text function, and lo, it comes to the next line immediately. And at this point of time, because I'm in the debugger, this file has been read, and this event, although internally the file has been read, the debugger hasn't stepped into this event handler yet, and this is an intricacy of the JavaScript engine and nothing else. It will at some later point step into this randomly for some files. But this is strange. If you look at the content of all files, it has the contents of the literature.txt file. If I keep stepping through, I go to the next file, set up a handler, and then call the read as text. And now because I am in the debugger, it is nicely concatenating everything to this variable. So if I read this variable again, it has the contents of both the literature.txt file and the spiritual books.txt file. That is only because we are in the debugger. I go to the next file, I attach the event handler, I call the read as text method, and because we're in the debugger, it has concatenated the third file's contents also to the content of all files variable. Let's check that. And this time the content of all files variable has the literature.txt books, spiritualbooks.txt, and technicalbooks.txt. If I leave the debugger and release it, it will display the contents correctly only because we have been in the debugger. I will delete all the breakpoints. If I were to run this outside the debugger again, let me close the developer tools and select the 3 files again, I would not see any contents again. So what is it that's happening really? Why is there this problem? Let's look at our code to inspect what the problem is. The computer normally executes every line of code one after the other. So for example, when it is executing this line, which is an assignment statement, it assigns one variable value to another, it will not at the same time be executing the next line. It is only after it finishes this line that it comes to the next line. This is known as serial execution of code. It is also known as synchronous execution of code. So the computer first reads this line, then it reads this line, then this line and executes it. Then it reads this for loop and says, for each file I've got to do something. So it starts reading this line for the first file. It creates an instance of the FileReader. Then it comes to this line and says, do I have to execute this? Sure, I have to execute this whole thing, and this whole thing simply is attaching to the onload property a function that will be run at a later time when the file has been read. So while this line is executed right now, all that this line does is it associates with this property a function, it does not mean that this function will be called right now. So what is inside the body of this function is not going to be called now. It will be called at a later time whenever the file's contents have been read. So the computer says, oh, right now in this line, let's execute this line. All we have to do is attach to this property, this function, and that's it. We don't have to run what's inside this. At least for now, we don't have to run it. So it attaches this, and then it comes to the next line and says, let's read the file. This instruction is also executed very quickly. When we call the read as text method on the FileReader, the FileReader internally issues a command to the hardware saying, please go and read this file from the hard disk. And some part of the hardware goes to the floppy disks or the hard disk and starts reading this file. And while it is reading this, the computer at the same time, it doesn't wait for the file to be read. It just tells the hardware that is reading the file that when you have read the file, please give me a nudge. And at that time, I will call or execute the instructions inside this function. Until then, don't bother me. I have many other things to do, which is to execute this line of code. So while the computer is executing this line and then the next line and the next line if there is any, some other hardware is at the same time going to the hard disk and reading the file's contents. This method of execution is called asynchronous execution. So until here, the code was synchronous. And suddenly, because of this handler, this file read was commissioned to be run asynchronously, which means the file reader tells the hardware, look, please read this file as text and give it to me whenever you're ready. Meanwhile, I got a lot of things to do. Don't bother me right now. When you're done, just give me a nudge and I will, at the time, if I'm not doing anything, I will immediately execute this function. If I am doing something at the time, which is if there were more lines here to execute, then the computer would still have been busy doing this. And if at that time, suddenly that piece of hardware which read the file were to come back to the computer and say, here are the file's contents, the computer would say, shh, don't trouble me now. I'm still reading this. It'll say, here is a queue, like you go to the superstore and then you wait in the queue to pay for your items. It says, stand in this queue. In this queue, there are all those people standing to whom I sent off to do some work for me. And they have come back with their results. Stand in the queue when your number comes. Once I'm done reading and executing these instructions which the poor user has written, I will in between come and check that queue. If there are any people standing in that queue, you will also be standing in that queue when I get to you. That is when I will execute this function. The contents of the onload function. So by the time the computer gets to executing this, it has long passed these lines of code. When it gets to this, it executes this line, and that line is simply assigning a function to be run later. And then it immediately comes to this line. So by the time it gets to this line, this variable is still empty. And so it innocently displays that variable, long after which time it comes to this. Now, how do we fix this? Or can we fix this? Of course, anything can be fixed. And one of the ways to get around this problem, again, I'm saying to get around this problem, not to fix it for once and for all. Getting around simply means you're executing a kludge. You're finding a sidewalk around the problem. You're not handling it face to face. One way to tiptoe around the problem and make your way, make a little sidewalk, is that instead of reading the files after this, we can move this and read the files inside this function. Every time this is done, the text box previous contents are erased and this new variable is assigned. We are not concatenating anything to the text box. Please note this observation. It is critical to what I'm saying. We are not concatenating new contents to the existing contents of the text box. We are at every iteration or every execution of this function, we are reassigning new content to the text box, and this new content seems to be elastically growing. So while this will work, the downside of this approach is you are repainting the whole DOM every time a new file is read. Here I'm reading just a text box. I'm filling just a text box. But this could be anything in a large-scale real-world application. It could be 10,000 lines of code doing different kinds of things which repaint the whole window, make a few AJAX requests, get a bunch of stuff. So the problem with this structure, although this is a workaround we've invented. The problem with this is, although this will work, it warps your whole structure of thinking. Because now you got to write the rest of the code here, and then this could be 10,000 lines with their own indented for loops in between, with their own indented if constructs and switch cases and all other kinds of code in between. So your real code goes down and down and down, like to these many levels of indentation, and then it comes back again. So this workaround spoils the structure. But let's execute it for what it's worth to see if it actually works. I select 3 files, and this time, without any hassle, I'm able to print the contents. So that was one workaround. Suppose I don't want to do that. Suppose I just wanted my code to read like normally you would write code, serially. I hope you've got the problem well highlighted in your mind, that the structure of this FileReader class as it is, because of the way it handles the asynchrony, is not well suited to a readable design of code. We can solve this problem by using something called promises. So in the next video, I will teach you first what a promise is, and in the following video after that, we will rewrite the FileReader and we will make that component also asynchronous, but in a way that it lends itself to a seamless writing of code. If you want to become a software developer and join the software industry, I will be starting a course teaching everything from the very beginning, the basics of what a computer is, what a variable is, what a program is. I'll hold your hands, teach you through the very, very basics for a very long time, every other day or so, for a couple of hours a week, over a long period of time, and until the end I will see it through that you make a good developer of yourself if you have the aptitude. This is even beneficial for those who are already working developers and want to relearn the ropes, maybe fill in a few gaps, make yourself a better software developer, enable yourself, or even for managers of whatever level. You may be a manager managing a small team, or you may be a C-level executive who wants to learn the ropes, get to know what it is that these developers do so that they can make better financial decisions if they're managing a technical company, because all financial decisions ultimately tie into how well you understand technology. So please go to my website satyaish.net, scroll down to the bottom of the website, and please join the mailing list so I'll be able to send you an email as soon as I launch the course.
Socrates, the Greek philosopher, he said he enjoyed going through the marketplace because he saw so many things there he could do without. And the first vow of renunciation is simplicity, living a simple life. That means not accumulating a lot of unnecessary possessions and things that take away our mind. Buddha said, "He who has cows has care of cows." So, whatever we have to take care of. Can't help it. One time, a young man came to a master in India, and the master was introducing him to the ashram life, and he said to him, "What you want and we don't have, just let me know, and I will show you how to do without it."
Shiva Shiva Shambho, Shiva 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 Shambho, Shiva 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 Shambho, Shiva 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 Shambho, Mahadeva Shambho, Mahadeva Shambho, Mahadeva Shambho, Mahadeva Shambho, Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho, Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho, Jaya Jaya Shiva Shambho.